What up, perps? Kid Copious back in effect. Purple State Party, you know what we're doing here? Repping America, the center, and common sense. This week's letter is R. Got a lot of R's. In fact, I'm going to cover everything with R's. How about that? Not even going to have any news, but let's get to it. So the first R I want to start on is something close to my heart, I guess you could say. Rehab. I've always said rehab is a cheat code. You know, when you go through the rehabilitation process, I had an extended stay one, so I was in there for quite a while. Had a lot of group meetings, things like that. And one thing that I had to learn was, to take on board criticism. That's something that I think is lacking in today's society, where nobody takes on board criticism, partially because I don't think a lot of criticism is very productive to begin with. But you have to be able to look for that stuff. You have to be able to look for the criticisms that you can work on or that will make you more successful or healthier or whatever it is, right? The other thing we learned was we have to be responsible for ourselves. Nobody else is going to keep us sober. I wish the opposite was true, but it's not. I mean, every day I'm bombarded by alcohol ads. I'm around people who drink. I'm around people who drink and still to this day offer me a drink. It's bizarre to me, but that's what happens. Another thing you learn in rehab is that you have to understand another person's point of view. When people are sharing their stories, you get to see how other people live their lives, the choices that they made, and you have to respect them. You have to understand that. I think politically, it's really important because what we see, especially here in California, is we see that these politicians take a point of view and they never consider the fallout. We press for one person's rights while trampling another person's rights. We do things in the name of the environment, but we never look at the boots on the ground consequences of those actions, how it affects people. We don't weigh those, the pros and cons of things, because too many people nowadays cling to their point of view and will never let any, resistance or criticism in. When the resistance or the criticism gets to be too much, they just walk away. And, the number one thing that we learned in rehab is, you've got to see the truth, even when the lie is better suited to your ego. Alcoholics and drug addicts often think that they could quit tomorrow, that all they're doing is harming themselves. It's nobody else's business. And, again, tying that into politics, we need to see the truth when the lie is better suited to your ego. A great example of that in California is the bullet train. Voters voted for it. I don't know why. But it's turned into a boondoggle. It's turned into a way to siphon money off to various groups and individuals that could be politically beneficial. And that's why they continue to do it. But the truth of the matter is this bullet train is never going to be what was promised. It's never going to be a vital transportation, a mode of transportation for California. It's useless. I heard recently when they were talking about how ridership was based on an estimate of how many riders would ride, and those numbers were higher than what we see in Japan and France, where the bullet train has more purpose. They tried to contextualize that by saying, well, you got to remember that not only is it going to run from Palmdale to Gilroy, but there's going to be stops in between. Stops for what? What's out there? I've been out there. There's nothing along that route of any value. Maybe you can get to things that can connect, but you could already get to places without having to go through all that hassle. So the next R we're going to move on to is radicals and their theories. This goes back to what I was just saying about seeing the truth. A lot of the radical elements right now, especially coming out of the left, their ideas are just plain wrong. That's just it. But they deny the evidence. When you have people out there, Queers for Palestine, and you're railing about how evil Israel is, but Israel is a place that's very accepting of the LGBT community, and Palestine's not, whatever Palestine is. They still think that it's better to move to Gaza. They still think it's better to move to other Arab nations other than Israel, because they're not letting the truth in. They're out there protesting against Israel, and they're never going to say anything good about Israel. It's just that. It's just insipid. So moving from radicals and their wrong theories, I want to move into somebody else who I consider to be a very fair-minded, balanced person, Condoleezza Rice. See how that R fits in there, Rice. You look for markers in life. You look for road signs to the truth. And for me, Condoleezza Rice is one of those signposts. I don't doubt her word. I don't doubt her opinion. If she says something that contradicts my opinion, well, I have to look at it. I have to wonder, why does she feel that way? Now, if you don't know, she was Secretary of State under W. She's a Republican. You can hold that against her if you want. She also happens to be a black lady. And you see, let me just go off on that for a second. We talk about, accepting lies because it feeds your ego. What about what goes on in some of these communities where, they preach this tolerance, but they hate people who don't see things politically the same way? Black people hate black people who vote Republican. Gays hate Republicans. And if you're gay and Republican, then they toss you out, essentially. Because for some reason in this country, we have allowed our political affiliation to be the number one determination of who you are as a person. Right? I mean, we see it every single day, and it's fucking ridiculous. That's one of the reasons why I always put my hands up during these arguments and go, hey, remember, I'm purple. Because I don't necessarily agree with everything Trump does, and I certainly didn't agree with anything that Biden does. He had a few good ideas that he kneecapped with his DEI requirements. And Gavin Newsom, come on. I mean, I live in California. This is taxation without representation out here. Nobody is on my side. But anyhow, back to Condoleezza Rice. One of the things that's important to remember is how she became a Republican. She was a Democrat until 1982 when she changed her political affiliation to Republican, in part because she disagreed with foreign policy of the then President Jimmy Carter, and because of the influence of her father, who was a Republican. When she spoke at the 2000 Republican National Convention, she brought up the story of her father. My father joined our party, she said, because the Democrats in Jim Crow, Alabama of 1952 would not register him to vote. The Republicans did. Now, I know that there are people out there who voted for Trump who are just stone cold racist. That's another R, racism. But the majority of the party really doesn't give a shit. They don't really care what the color of your skin is, because that's not a really good indicator of who you are as a person. Condoleezza Rice is a black woman, and she is one of the most respected politicians out there. She has, I forgot the name of that service that, it's not coming to me. But Condoleezza Rice did a class on there in diplomacy, because she understands diplomacy. But some people aren't going to listen to what she has to say when she talks about Iran, because she basically says unequivocally Iran doesn't want peace. She also added that Trump's strikes were effective and that it signals that America's back. We could talk all day long about the effectiveness of his strikes, but the truth of the matter is he showed Iran, hey, we're not going to just sit by and placate you anymore. We're going to get involved. And the way we're going to get involved is by turning some of your facilities into canyons. And that sends a powerful message. World leaders across the globe, either behind closed doors or right out in open, are praising Trump for trying to make the world a better place. Because, frankly, Iran is a facilitator of terrorism across the globe. And for us to finally just say, hey, here's a giant shot across your bow, that means something. So the next R is ridiculousness. Ridiculousness. Yeah. The California budget. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed on Friday a budget that pares back a number of progressive priorities, including a landmark health care expansion for low-income adult illegal immigrants to close a $12 billion deficit. Now think about this. California brags that we have the fourth largest economy in the world. We've moved up. We used to be 5, now we're 4. Great. All right. It's the third year in a row that the nation's most populous state has been forced to slash funding or stop some of the programs championed by Democratic leaders. Lawmakers passed the budget earlier following an agreement of a $321 billion spending plan between Newsom and Democratic leaders. And they're trying to say that there's no new taxes on Californians. Well, the gas tax is about to go up. Their policies, Democratic policies, have crippled the oil industry. And now keep in mind, in California, we don't rely on other people's oil. We have to have our gasoline refined to a different point. We have California gas, so to speak. So we have refineries here that refine it to the quality that Gavin Newsom and the other liberals have deemed acceptable. Our refineries here are closing. They're closing. We can't drill here. We can't refine here. Where the hell are we going to get our gas? We're going to have to pay other people now to refine it and transport it over here, which is horrible for the environment. You might think that not drilling in California is the solution to the environment, that you're okay with the fact that we could shift, so to speak, the responsibility for the environment onto other countries by buying our oil and having it refined over there and then shipped over here. But the truth of the matter is that it's all bad for the environment. So the fact that we can sit there and go, well, that doesn't count against our carbon. Well, yes, it does, because it's all coming here. Republican lawmakers say they were left out of the budget negotiations. They also criticize Democrats for not doing enough to address future deficits, which could range between $17 billion and $24 billion annually. Under the budget deal, California will stop enrolling new patients without legal status in the state funding health care starting in 2026. California lawmakers to back proposal to freeze health care access. The state will also implement a $30 monthly premium starting in 2027 for immigrants remaining on the program, including some with legal status. Oh, that's great. That's great. But let's look at a few things that they wow, some of the things they scrapped. They got $78 million in funding for mental health phone lines. Wow. Okay. Including a program that served 100,000 people annually. Yeah, so we're going to just do away with mental illness services. They're eliminating funding that helps pay for dental service for low-income people. And they delay the implementation of legislation requiring health insurance to cover fertility services. See, that's one of their darling projects. I'm glad they're eliminating that one. But lawmakers also successfully pushed back on several proposed cuts from Newsom that they called draconian. The deal secures funding for a program providing in-home domestic and personal care services for some low-income residents and Californians with disabilities. And it also avoids cuts to Planned Parenthood. Okay, that's great. Lawmakers also agreed to let the state tap $1 billion from its cap-and-trade program to fund state firefighting efforts. Okay, so that's that bullshit carbon credit thing that they run, where if you pollute, you have to pay. Literally, it says it right here. Companies have to buy credits to pollute, and that money goes into a fund lawmakers are supposed to tap for climate-related spending. Well, guess what? Another billion of that through 2045, will also go to the long-delayed high-speed rail project, because somehow we're going to say that the rail project helps the environment. Okay. The budget also provides $10 million to help support immigration legal services, including deportation defense. So you enter our country illegally and in violation of federal law, but California will give you the money to fight your deportation? What the hell? These people are not playing by the rules when they cross illegally, and we're going to help defend them? What? Where? Where is the responsibility for that? Why do we have, as taxpayers, a responsibility to defend people who came into the country illegally? There is a process to come to this country. It's that simple. It might not be easy. It might cost some money, blah, 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 blah. But again, if you want to spend $10 million to help people come here legally, well, I could get behind that. But for them to cross here illegally and then the state's going to pay for their defense, that's ridiculous. And along the way, with all of these cuts that they have to make, right, they're raising the film tax credit. So the tax credits that filmmakers and TV shows and even commercials can get. The program, A Priority for Newsom, will start this year and expire in 2030. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. So, again, everybody railed on Trump and other Republicans when they had tax cuts, but they increased spending. Well, here goes Newsom. You know, we don't have enough money, and he's desperate to get Hollywood back. If it's cheaper to film other places, it's cheaper to film other places. You got to see that. You know, tax credits are great, but you still got to house these people. You still got to feed these people. You still got to provide security for these people. California is an expensive place to film with all the permits, regulations, all that crap, all the politicians dipping in. And of course, because of all of these shortage, you know, cities and counties won't see new funding to help them address homelessness, which local leaders say could lead to the loss of thousands of shelter beds. So we're going to close our shelters so that we can continue to give money to the rail project, so we can continue to give money to illegal aliens, right? And the budget also doesn't act on Newsom's proposal to streamline a project to create a massive underground tunnel to reroute a big part of the state's water supply. Water, another important thing that's being neglected, so that they can continue with their stupid programs, their stupid train, their stupid insurance for illegal immigrants, their stupid doling out of billions of dollars to not fix the homeless problem. And the people who are supposed to be keeping an eye on this kind of stuff, researching it and reporting on it, reporters, nah, that's the next star, reporters. You know, there was a fake Iran report that was quickly discredited. But the media and the reporters continue to quote that as a source. They quote a debunked report about the effectiveness of the strikes in Iran. The New York Times, the Washington Post, LA Times, CNN, MSNBC. They're in the business of making Trump look bad while shielding the Democrats. Well, it's just propaganda. Why the hell should people pay for these subscriptions to just get propaganda? If Trump does something that's bad and you could show us why it's bad, great. If Trump does something good and you can explain why it's good, you should be explaining it. I'm sorry. I understand that they're in the business of making money and blah, 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 and they need to get clicks. But there has to be some responsibility. Yeah, that's another R, responsibility. You know, and look at the evidence that we have here. The laptop, Biden's mental health, right? Those two big giant lies. The Russian collusion, there's three giant lies for you. And now it's Iran was a failure, right? Why are we supposed to believe these people anymore? They've been caught 3 times lying. 3 times they've been caught lying. And what do? Now, they just go off on Trump saying, oh, well, Trump promised no wars. Well, duh. This is how you end wars. Respect. That's an R. I just want to bring this up. I am a fervent supporter of Israel, the Jewish people. I think what they have crafted in Israel is a pretty decent society. Like everyone and everything, there are pluses and minuses. But I want to look at some of the pluses, because this is something that I don't think is going to get reported on. Right? First of all, the Capitol Museum. You remember that? It's in D.C., and it's where that Jewish couple was brutally murdered a couple months ago. And you actually had, far-left people saying, oh, that's the price you pay for being Jewish. Well, they're hosting an LGBT exhibit. And they're hosting that because they care about people. And they want people who feel marginalized to understand that just because somebody subscribes to a religion doesn't mean that they believe that XYZ is true. The Jewish people accept other people. Look at Israel. Gays, Jews, and Arabs all live together without any limitations. Arabs hold government positions. They serve in the military. Tel Aviv has a larger percentage of gay people than even San Francisco. But no, we're not going to talk about that because right now, all of the rhetoric happens to be on Israel bad. Another thing that I saw, somebody I know sent to me, was a pride festival in Mexico City. Those are the changing times that we live in. Those are the realities of the world that we live in. You know, when people like Whoopi Goldberg talk about how the people of Iran have it as bad as, the black people in America have it as bad as the people in Iran, she's just talking out her ass. And a lot of the people on the left, that's all they do is they talk out of their ass. Look, one of the reasons why we have to focus on the left so much is because they make up a large portion of Hollywood, music, entertainment, all of those things. All the people who have voices. But they don't want to. They don't want to speak the truth. They only want to continue with their political rhetoric. They don't want to admit that they have flaws in their logic or that their party is flawed. Let's look at how their party is flawed. Let's talk about raids. When you incentivize illegal immigration, you get a lot of illegals. That's how it is in California. California is a sanctuary state that will give you free health care for being here illegally, right? So yeah, ICE has to come to town. Well, this Cynthia Gonzalez here, the vice mayor of Cudahy in southeast LA County, went on social media and basically chastised the gangs for not coming out and defending their block against ICE. She called ICE the biggest gang in America. These are federal agents enforcing federal law that California thumbs its nose at. I don't understand how these people could come out and say these kind of things. It's illogical. It's what ICE is doing is legal. Is it heavy-handed? Sure. Just like sometimes the police could be heavy-handed. But so are the protesters. So are the illegal immigrants. So are the criminals. They are more times going to be brutal and violent. But if California would do anything to help, maybe these things could be mitigated. But no. California wants to thumb its nose at federal law, and then you get people like this Cynthia Gonzalez with their rhetoric. I want to tell you a little bit about rhetoric as I heard this week. My daughter brought this up. Trump defunded the Trevor Project. She was pissed about that. But then I pointed something out to her that she didn't know because it was left out of a lot of the articles. Trevor Project had an online presence and online chat rooms where people between the ages of, I believe, 9 and 24 were, supposed to gather in an online space to talk about their problems, to hopefully get some mental health help. Well, what it ended up being was any person, who wants to be pedophilic could go on there and meet kids who are already struggling mentally, struggling with family issues. It was a place that they could be preyed upon. They don't know the exact numbers because all of this stuff is shielded, under HIPAA laws and all of that crap. But this was a free-for-all. There was no age verification. People weren't making sure that 50-year-old pedophiles weren't going on there and finding damaged 13-year-old girls and convincing them to meet in real life. So it got shut down. And when you bring that up, the next thing they say, right, is, well, did he replace it? Well, no, because that takes time. That takes time to replace a system like that with something that actually works. But you believe the rhetoric. Well, like we mentioned earlier, Gavin Newsom's defunding a mental health phone line, which did not have an online chat room where pedophiles could find victims. Right? He's defunding that. Where's all the outrage about that? That's all. See, that's what I'm looking for. Is you got to be truthful in what you see for your point of view. You can't sit there and say that Trump's bad for defunding the Trevor Project, which had some really big problems, but then say nothing about Gavin Newsom taking money away from a mental health phone line for no good reason other than the fact that he wants to spend that money, right? He wants to spend that money on a fucking bullet train. That's dumb. Trump does it to keep kids safe. Gavin does it to keep a bullet train moving forward. And nobody wants to call him out. The only people who call him out are centralists and Republicans. And then we're just besmirched as, well, we're just choosing sides. No, I'm not choosing sides. I'm looking at two instances where mental health was put on the back burner, and I'm looking at the reasons why, and I'm judging it accordingly. If it had gone the other way, I'd be saying the exact same thing. I would say Gavin was right and Trump was wrong. But that's not what happened. Trump had a valid reason to defund it. Gavin didn't. But, it's getting late here. Running out of time. So I just want to say something. One last thing here. Purple State Party, that movement that I am trying to create here to get people to a common sense, common ground in the center, seeks rational, reasonable, and respectful discussions so we can get to real results. That's who I am. I might not always be accurate. Sometimes I might get fed a line of bull, but I try really hard to do the research and bring you the actual results, no matter how it makes me look. It's very easy right now because there aren't any centralists out there. There are a few milling about that might pop up in the coming elections, and I hope they do, because we cannot continue the way we are continuing right now. In case you forgot, I'm Kid Copious, Purple State Party, and so are you. Love one another. Keep on grinding. And whenever possible, you know what? Dance it out.